Hello, I'm Rahul Bhardwaj, the President and CEO of the Institute of Corporate Directors. Now, whether they're large corporations or small retailers, businesses operate in communities and are staffed by the people who live in those communities. As the conversation in Canada around COVID-19 moves onto economic re-entry, it will be critical for leaders to get a sense of what to expect in the coming weeks and months. As we're about to experience, the dialogue around economic reentry is as much about community preparedness as it is about macroeconomic policy. Joining me today to discuss, I'm very pleased to welcome His Worship, Jim Watson, the Mayor of Ottawa. Jim Watson was re-elected mayor for a third consecutive term in 2018 with more than 71% of the popular vote. He's also served as the President and CEO of Canadian Tourism Commission, a federal crown corporation, as well as Ontario's Minister of Consumer and Business Services, Minister of Health Promotion, and Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Welcome, Mayor Watson, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Rahul. Appreciate it.
Now, Mayor, as we enter the next phase and we turn our attention to slowly reintegrating our economy and society, can you provide us with a little bit of insight into the issues that you and other municipal leaders may be discussing at council or within city managers' offices?
Yeah, it's very timely. We just had a council meeting and a briefing on COVID-19 and the impact it's having on our city. We're a city now of over 1 million people. We have about 16,000 employees that make up the City of Ottawa workforce. And we have obviously some real serious challenges like every organization is facing. We have the benefit of the ability to tax, but we can't always tax our way out of problems. That's not the responsible thing to do, particularly when so many businesses in particular have lost everything. So our challenge, like a lot of other organizations, is on the revenue side. We're losing now about $1 million a day as a result of our transit system numbers have collapsed. We're down to maybe 10 or 20% of the normal fares that are using our train and bus system. Also, we're losing money as a result of kids not taking skating lessons and swimming lessons and recreation center bookings and so on. So we're looking at a significant shortfall in revenue. And unlike the other two levels of government, the federal and provincial government, we're not allowed to run a deficit. So we have to find the funds from within. And if we're not able to do that, we have to go into our reserve funds, which is never a great way to budget.
So given all of that, what would your counsel be about some of the realities and challenges that employers and leaders such as board directors need to get a handle on as we begin the economic reintegration? You touched on issues like public transit and enforced social distancing, but are there policies or allowances that employers should be considering in light of these challenges?
Well, I think that the challenge we're all facing, whether you're a public or a private corporation, is the well-being of your workforce. We're very much a service-based operation, providing services, whether it's police, fire, paramedics, road crews, garbage, libraries, and so on. And we're looking at what we can do as an organization to re-enter a lot of these employees who basically have been working from home. Although in our case, a lot of our employees just cannot work from home. Whether you're picking up the garbage or plowing a street or maintaining a park or arena, it's very much you have to be in the office or the place of employment. So our challenge is a little bit more unique than some other organizations. I look across the street and one of the great Canadian success stories is Shopify. I think they're now the largest corporation in the country, surpassing, I believe, the Royal Bank I saw the other day. They were quick to get everyone out of their buildings and working from home because they have an operation that can do that. We can't do that, so we have to make provisions both for our employees and what are those changes for the so-called new normal that we have to do. Right now, we're not allowing people to enter our buses from the front door to protect the drivers. So we lose 1/3 of the space of the buses, which right now is not a problem. But when we're back up and running, hopefully at full steam in September, we'll need that space. So how do we protect the drivers and how do we respect physical distancing? The same with our office setup. Most of our offices, people are in cubicles. They're, as I say, cheek by jowl with one another. What are we going to do to ensure their protection from the spread of the virus? Because we know there's not going to be one day where the virus goes away entirely. It's going to peak and valley, unfortunately, for some time. Our medical officer of health is telling us. So, our council, in essence, is our board of directors, and we're tasked with coming up with policies that are affordable and reasonable and financially sourced, and up to our senior staff, our city manager, to bring forward proposals. And in June of this year, just next month, they'll be bringing forward financial analysis of where we stand. We're in relatively good shape in our city because we have such a large base of public servants who are still being paid. So when the economy opens up and people start going back to restaurants and so on, hopefully these people who have been on the payroll, in essence, will be able to help kickstart the economy for a lot of these small businesses.
Right. So I get the sense that, there are a lot of impacts that business leaders are going to need to appreciate and understand. And they've often taken a lot of the services provided by municipalities for granted. And I think it's going to be a new normal for them to work within that construct. Now, if I shift the dial just a little bit, as a government leader that you are, your decisions, particularly now, will have an important impact on how we all live and work. And I'm curious to know, what are some of the markers or milestones you think we'll need to see before city life can adapt more fully as it was before?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't think anyone in the world, quite frankly, has a good answer for that question, because we're relying obviously on our medical officers of health who have been doing a remarkable job from the municipal leaders to the provincial to the federal doctors and healthcare professionals. Our challenge is, unlike a flood, we had very serious flooding issues last year. You generally know when the flooding waters are going to recede. It's the same when we had an ice storm back a couple of decades ago that paralyzed all parts of Eastern Ontario and Western Quebec. You knew that ice was going to melt and it was going to cause so much damage to trees and power lines. This is the unknown. No one knows when this is going to end. We saw in the province in China where the numbers are starting to go up again, which is a worry. And I think there's this sense of frustration on the part of the public. They want to get back to a normal or a new normal, but it has to be done thoughtfully and carefully, as I think Premier Ford and other premiers are trying to get the message across. Let's ease into this so that we don't have to put ourselves in this terrible situation where we rush to open up facilities, then the numbers spike up again, and then we have to tell all these people, I'm sorry, you're going to be laid off again. The challenge we have is that a lot of the people who have been laid off are the economically challenged people in our community. They're minimum wage, working at grocery stores and retail stores and so on. And then you have the businesses, of course, who have lost, in many instances, 100% of their revenue. So, I think the staged approach is the one that's the most sensible and safest. But the reality is we don't know what's going to happen next week, let alone next month, let alone next year.
These are certainly challenging times. I'm curious to know, has the business community in Ottawa engaged with your office on seeking or sharing ways in how they would like to see their businesses open and how they can work better with the municipality?
Very much so. Shortly after the COVID-19 pandemic struck Ottawa and struck our country, we established an economic recovery task force that I chair. And it's made up of our business improvement area representatives, the Regroupement des gens d'affaires, which is a francophone business group, the Ottawa Board of Trade, Invest Ottawa, our investment agency, the Festival Network, Ottawa Tourism. All of these leaders come together on a weekly basis. And our first approach was to help those businesses that are still in business. How do we get people to buy local, buy gift certificates and gift cards and so on from businesses who need the cash flow, and then come and enjoy their meals and goods and services once things get back to normal with your gift card. We also offered a tax deferral program for residents and landlords so that they can put off paying their property taxes instead of in June and July That date has now been pushed back for those people who qualify to October. So it gives them a little bit of a relief from some of the pressures they're facing to pay their rent, for instance. We've got, the tourism industry is very big in our community. It's the third largest employer. And we've had to cancel some of our biggest events, including Canada Day on Parliament Hill, which has been a tradition for decades and decades. And that brings a lot of people into the city, and our Blues Fest and other major festivals. We're in the midst right now of our Tulip Festival. The tulips have come up, but not a lot of people here to see them. So we're working very closely with the business community. We have a good relationship with business, and as I said, we're working from the micro level at the street level, the business improvement area, to the Board of Trade, which looks at the macro level of how to get the economy going, booming again. Because prior to the pandemic, we were actually firing on all cylinders here in Ottawa. We had the lowest unemployment rate in about 30 years, about 4.2, 4.3%. And companies like Shopify and others were having a tough time finding people to work. So our challenge is to reemerge and do our very best to get back to that scenario where business is doing very well. And when business is doing well, the public does well in terms of job opportunities and economic development, and ability to pay for some of the social programs that we all want and need to help those less fortunate in our community.
For sure. So it's good to know that you're in conversation with the business community. I'd also be curious to know that as the province starts to speak about reentry into the next phase, are you seeing a consensus amongst the business leaders on how that reintegration should take place? Is there an alignment between your thinking as a municipality and generally speaking in the business community? Are you all on the same page at this point?
I would say yes. I think there are obviously some people that want to get their business or their sector open sooner. We're beholden to a large degree by provincial regulations under the Provincial Emergencies Act. So we have to do a lot of the enforcement for decisions made by the provincial government. But we're in sync with the province. I've had a number of good conversations with Premier Ford since this began, and other federal ministers as well, and other provincial ministers. But from the business community, I think they understand the risk of coming back too soon as well. They put their employees at risk, their customers, and their organization. And so the slow and steady approach may not be to everyone's liking, but I think it's the prudent thing to do, given the fact that we have we lack a roadmap as to how to deal with something like this.
For sure. I can appreciate that. Now, let me personalize this for just in one respect, and that is, as the head of a very large employer yourself, how have you approached the crisis, particularly in terms of keeping employees safe, and above all, instilling confidence that the city and they can have, in weathering this storm?
Well, I think it's done by actions instead of words. We've kept the systems that are vitally important to the ongoing operations of a large city like Ottawa, as well as the water filtration plant, garbage and recycling, police, paramedic, fire services. We're trying to do as much as we can remotely. All of our council meetings have been done remotely. We haven't canceled a council meeting. We continue business as usual, although it's a little different, dealing with an audio feed as opposed to my colleagues in the council chamber. So I think we've done it relatively well. The reality is there's always critics. People want us to do something differently, and they want parks open faster, or they want community centers. But again, I think the responsible thing for any leader in any organization is to ensure their employees, their customers, and in some instances their shareholders are taken care of. We've seen the devastation that this has caused a number of companies globally, large companies that you never expected to fail. Neiman Marcus, filing, I think, Chapter 11 in the United States. So, unfortunately, we're going to see a number of companies and stores, individual stores, that will close because they're just not able to sustain lack of revenue for the last 2 months, 3 months.
Now, I'd like to wrap up our conversation today on a very important issue, and that's the issue of trust. And I'd be curious to know, do you have any thoughts on how we can reinforce trust in our communities? Trust in our neighbors not to make us sick, trust in our employers not to put us at risk, and trust in our governments to protect us from the worst of this fallout.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think one of the things that's interesting is that we've seen the vast majority of the public here in our city of Ottawa have followed the rules, have respected physical distancing and so on. And there's a small minority that feel that the rules are not for them and they're putting themselves and, more importantly, putting others at risk. So we had, these so-called skirmishes all the time in our park system where everyone wanted to go and use the kids, were driving them crazy, climbing the walls. They want to get out in the parks. Yet our medical officer of health was saying it's not safe to send kids onto an area where you can touch points of swing sets and picnic tables and so on. And so, we ended up having to give out tickets through the bylaw system, and the media grabbed onto that, and it sounded like we were giving out tens of thousands of tickets when I think it was 140 we gave out in a city of 1 million. There's trust is a two-way street. The government has to be sensible and practical, and not impose things that are silly. The National Capital Commission of Federal Crown Corporation, who maintains the tulip beds, put signs up saying you can't take any pictures of the tulip beds. Well, that hit the fan, and it was not well received, and they had to reverse that particular decision. So I think we've had, for instance, neighbors who have called on neighbors because they're having parties in the backyard and so on. And I think something as serious and as dangerous and has caused so many deaths around the world, including in our own city, shouldn't be taken lightly. And you shouldn't have to tattle on your neighbor. But the reality is some people still either don't have the information, which I find hard to believe, or choose to ignore it thinking they're invincible and that they will not bring any harm to their families or their friends. So, we need the trust of governments and businesses and institutions, but we also need the trust of the people back and forth.
For sure. Well, Mayor Watson, thank you so much for joining me today. And to our viewing audience, thank you all for tuning in.